I am of the web of life. I am indissolubly linked with thousands of generations, with the whole evolution of life on earth. I can speak with that authority. I am of the web of life. I am indissolubly linked with thousands of generations, with the whole evolution of life on earth. I can speak with that authority. Aldo Leopold invites us to think like a mountain. And Arne Næss, Norwegian philosopher of Gandhi, coins the term deep ecology and invites us to explore the ecological self. These are wonderful concepts and invitations that have influenced a whole generation of thinkers and activists to help us realize that humans are not at the crown of creation and that we will not be able to solve the ecological crisis or the social crises either, or political or military crises, as long as we think that humans are exceptional and above the rest of the natural world. But when we regain, as contemporary science invites us to do, whether it's quantum theory or systems theory, chaos theory, Gaia theory, to take our place within the web of life, we see that humanity is just one bright and beautiful strand in the web of life, but not the dominant, not the one species for whose profit and pleasure the rest of the natural world should serve. So these are wonderful ideas. What calls me to give my life to it is the fact that there is a group work that we call deep ecology work, and now more and more it's being called much more simply and universally the work that reconnects, le travail qui relie, where people can find those truths and those concepts enunciated by Leopold and Næss in their own experience, with their own authority. And this work that reconnects is built of not only the theoretical foundations of systems thinking, spiritual traditions, particularly indigenous thought, and deep ecology, but a series of practices where we can, the key factor here is that instead of listening to the experts, we realize that the person we most need to hear is the person inside. And so in the work that reconnects, which can take place in a half a day, a weekend, 30 days, it's a beautiful body of work dynamic and evolving. There are practices and processes by which people can talk to each other, speak out of their deepest understandings, and also their travail day by day, and coming to terms and seeing what's happening to our world, seeing the deforestation and the contamination of air and soil and water, to see what the military adventures are doing, to see the species of mass extinctions that are taking the whole bodies of our plant and animal kingdom. So people are having to face, along with the great social divides of this time that are getting more acute, they're seeing a world that seems to be coming apart, and a natural world that is being destroyed almost casually. And that they wonder what kind of life is there going to be for those who come after, and for many who are living now. And given the hyper-individualism of contemporary society and of our society of the last centuries, there's no reason for this separate cowboy ego to be terribly concerned. How do you begin to even believe the grief and the outrage that is felt so largely, widely by people on behalf of life? So in the work that reconnects, people can find ways to be with their world, a world that to many of them seems to be so endangered as to be on the way to a coming apart, on the way to collapse. When you realize that people are as interwoven in the deep ecology of our planet as Leopold and Ness show us, you can see that we're strong enough and we're interconnected enough to be able to tell the truth about what we see and know and feel is happening to our world. And once we do that, which takes a huge energy is released, energy that had been blocked by our repression of painful information, by our denial and avoidance, which has actually been in service to the consumer society and the industrial growth society. Because if we keep repressing our true feelings, it isolates us and makes us obedient. So not only in being able to do this truth speaking, which is at the heart of the work that reconnects, there is a release of energy and also a recovering of our natural authority. People find that, I belong here. I am of the web of life. I am indissolubly linked with thousands of generations, with the whole evolution of life on Earth. I can speak with that authority. So the work that reconnects is like not only helping us walk out of this prison cell of the isolated ego, but walk into a sense of solidarity with all life and a great appetite to work on its behalf in solidarity with each other. Thank you.
Got it. Bonjour la France. Mes amis en France.
Ecology, ecology. This is all about ecology. Ecology, ecology.
Et Belgique. suis cela.
We got ecology, ecology, masculinity, ecology, ecology.
Quebec.
From the Iron Age to the Diamond Age, we move away from consumer craze and the healing of the earth, a new world view, co-created by me and you, in the changes in our time that we, culture and culture, what Gaia said, where responsibility is taking care of the larger me. Thank you very much.
My name is Chris Johnstone. I live in the north of Scotland, and I am concerned by what I see, where there is a pattern of behaviour that is destructive that we appear to be stuck in. And there are other areas where people can get stuck in destructive patterns of behaviour, like addictions, for example. And one of the areas of my work, I worked as an addiction specialist for nearly 20 years, and I see such strong parallels between that stuck pattern of destructive behaviour in addictions and the stuck pattern of destructive behaviour of our society in terms of our relationship with our environment. Now, a lot of people say, oh, we're addicted to consumerism, we're addicted to materials, but not many people are also seeing how in addictions recovery there are treatments that make a difference, and a lot of the insights and principles of those treatments can also be applied to stuck patterns of behaviour in relation to the world. And so a lot of my work is about seeing what we can learn from addictions recovery and apply to the recovery of our world. So my background, I trained as a medical doctor, and I started working with Joanna Macy in 1989 and had a profound effect on me. I'd known about her work since the mid or early 1980s, and I saw in her work something that so paralleled my understanding that I was developing in terms of how we tackle health problems. I felt at home in her work. I felt that she was giving attention to one of the important missing pieces of the puzzle. And the missing piece of the puzzle I call the middle bit of change. So the first bit of change is becoming aware of the problems, statistics, graphs, graphic images. And the third part of change is having the inspiring response, building windmills, having permaculture, having campaigns to change. But between awareness and action is a really important missing piece. And that's what I see Joanna Macy's work addressing, and that's also the work that I have been involved in addressing over the last 25 years. So I call it the middle bit of change, and it includes issues like, do we even want to look in the first place? What are our values? Do we believe it has anything to do with us, or do we see it as a problem for someone else, for future generations? So one of the parts of the middle bit of change is the degree to which we believe this is personally relevant. But also, even when we believe it is important and we want to do anything, another really big factor is, do we believe that we can? Do we believe that it's within our power to be able to make a difference in the world? And I wrote a book called Find Your Power for dealing with situations that people feel are beyond their power, when they feel blocked, when they feel it's too much, that there's nothing I can do. A lot of my work in the addictions recovery field was working with people who felt powerless and hopeless. And it's looking at what helped them make the shift to from I can't face this is too much, I feel defeated, to I really believe that I can make a change, that it is worth taking the steps. And so that whole area of how we move from hopelessness to committed action, that's really been the core of my work. So is it relevant? And even when we believe it is relevant and important, do we believe that we have the power to make a difference? My work with Joanna Macy for over 24 years, what really drew me to working with her was she was one of the few people that I saw was addressing this area, this area of how do we find our power to make a difference? How do we strengthen our capacity to make a difference? And together over the last 4 years, we've worked together on a book called Active Hope. And the key here is that even if you feel hopeless, hope is not a thing that you have so much as a practice that you do. And this is what we call active hope. Active hope is, I think of like gardening or Tai Chi. Gardening or Tai Chi, you don't have gardening, you don't have Tai Chi, you do them. And it's the same with active hope. It's not so much something you have, it's something that you do. And that when you open to a story of hope, that story acts through you. You take part in it in a way that brings you more to life.
Chris, could you tell us a bit about the parallels between an addiction that's a personal issue and an addiction that's a societal, collective issue?
Yes, and I think it's here about saying what we mean by addiction, because some people react against the term. What I'm talking about is where we are overly dependent on a substance or behaviour in a way that brings a risk of harm. And so that's very easy to see when somebody is overly dependent on alcohol or tobacco or opiates. But we are also overly dependent on oil and on fossil fuels in general in a way that, and the risks are, if there is an interruption of supply, then we experience withdrawal symptoms. And so there is a panic if there is any threat to an interruption of supply of oil, to the degree to which we will go to war in countries that have oil in order to maintain our supply. But the other harmful effect of high use of fossil fuels is climate change. And what you see happen with addiction is that when people are hooked on a substance, even when they know it's causing them harm, they find ways of brushing away that information. We talk about a denial or looking the other way. And also there can be a feeling of reluctance to let go. And you get hooked on things that work. If they don't work for you, you choose something else. So alcohol seems like magic to relieve anxiety, but it's a short-term fix that makes the problem worse. And the same with oil. Oil seems to work like magic. It's incredibly convenient as a source of energy. But by becoming so dependent on it, we are leading ourselves towards a catastrophe. And the catastrophe is twofold. First of all, from the very high use of fossil fuels, which is unsustainable. There won't be enough fossil fuels to keep us going. That when we have an interruption of supply, we will have collapse of society. And already we are searching harder and harder for the remaining oil. And also there is a recklessness that we will go to any lengths, that we will drill miles beneath the ocean's surface in a way where it's difficult to have adequate safety. And so you have what happened with the Gulf oil spill, very, very deep mines. Something goes wrong, you end up polluting thousands of miles of coastline and huge areas of sea. That we are creating a dead zone actually within areas that have previously been of great beauty and flourishing existence. So there is the lengths to which we are going, and now we are talking about fracking, which has been shown to pollute water supplies, that we are wanting to inject chemicals at high pressure under the ground to force out the remaining oil, and gas, even though that has been shown to mean that those chemicals end up polluting the rivers and polluting our sources of water. But it's also this blindness to the long term. We only look like 5-10 years ahead. And it's the same with addiction, that you get addiction by having a short time frame. You're very interested in your next hit, your next dose, your next supply. And it's the same with our search for fossil fuels. We want for the next 5 years, the next 10 years. We're not looking what's going to happen in 30 years, when the children who are babies today, when they are in adulthood and having their children, what source of energy will they use? We're not asking this question. And so we are going blind into a future which is a disaster in the making. So you ask the question, well, what's the parallels? The parallels is when you're drinking very heavily as an alcoholic, you may think there's no problem. But the problem is in the direction that you are heading. The problem is further down the road. And it's the same with our over-dependence on oil, our over-dependence on fossil fuels. We may think now there's no problem, or the problem is that the petrol is too expensive. But if we ask the question, where is this taking us? What's going to happen if we continue this way, and in particular continue this way over 20, 30 or more years, that the amount of fuel available now, there's not enough to keep us going forever, and even if there was, the effects from climate change would be catastrophic. So Rob Hopkins, who developed the transition movement, he and we both met with Professor Stephen Rolnick. Professor Stephen Rolnick was one of the developers of an approach called motivational interviewing. He's a professor of healthcare communication. And we sat down together for a day and we looked at what can we learn from health psychology, where it is common for people to be over-dependent on behaviours or stuck in behaviours that we know are harmful. And what we know doesn't work is just to say you should stop. It doesn't work. that all you need to do is look on a packet of cigarettes. There can be government health warnings. Just telling people what to do is not, it has a small effect, but it's not nearly big enough. What seems to work much more is to provide a space for people to hear their own concerns. Most people, when they look into the future, they feel horrified. The polls have shown this, that most people do not feel optimistic about the future. They see the future as decline, as going downhill in terms of economic decline, social decline, and ecological decline. But because looking ahead is so disturbing, there is a reluctance to give it attention. And this is the breakthrough. The breakthrough is to allow ourselves to look in the eye at the disaster we're heading for, and to allow ourselves to feel disturbed. In addictions recovery, this is described as hitting rock bottom. When we hit rock bottom, it's the shock and alarm of, oh my God, what are we heading for? That has an awakening effect. That activation of our survival instinct is where a crisis can become a turning point. And so this is why I am so interested, Rob Hopkins and Stephen Rolnick, we got together saying, what can we learn? We know that people can recover from addiction. We know also that there are many hurdles in the way, but also an understanding of our psychology and our head and our heart can help recovery happen. And this is what we now need to apply to the ecology of our world.
Thank you very much, Chris.